Hello everyone and welcome back to TowerGate. It is Sunday, TowerGate day number 367, March the 11th, 2018. Thank you so much for tuning in. Well, it looks like we are back into the Jane Mayer New York Magazine piece. More fallout from that. So we're going to take a little deeper dive into that, talk about the new revelations from that, and some thoughts that I have now that I've had a couple days to read this article 2 or 3 times and kind of soak it all in. I'm starting to dig deeper myself into the questions about the origin of this, why it was written, who it was written for, and all those sorts of things. So a lot of this right now is just speculation, just the thoughts that are going through my mind that I'll share with you, and maybe together we can all come up with some answers. Let's give it a try. First of all, I'm talking, for those of you who haven't seen my last couple of videos, I'm talking about the article that was written this past Thursday or Friday, and it was in the New Yorker magazine, and it was written by Jane Mayer, or at least she's the one that's being credited with writing this story. Now, I'm going to post the link to this story for you right there in the description box so that you can click on that and read the story. And that's what it is. It really reads like a story. And what it appears to be on the surface is a story that is trying to resuscitate the reputation of Christopher Steele, the dossier, and the overall investigation around it, while painting the Democrats and those involved in the peripheral of this thing as just being people who had the best interest of the country in mind, while at the same time painting Trump and Manafort and Carter Page as these devious plotters working with the Russians. And so that's the general feel of the story, which I believe is a cover story. I believe is a planted story by someone for some other purpose, maybe several purposes. So, for those of you who have not seen the last couple videos, let me go ahead and back up just a little bit on some of the revelations. First, a day after the story, I came out and did my video, and I read the story, and I had a lot of problems with it, but I really focused on 2 things, which I'll get to in a moment. The day after that, Chuck Ross from the Daily Caller put out his story, and of course in his story, it was basically, I think it was titled 6 Things We Learned from the New Yorker magazine piece. And of course those 6 things from Chuck Ross were that Steele likely knew who funded the dossier. Number 2, Steele used the dozens of paid confidential collectors, even though Glenn Simpson told the Congress he did not. Number 3, Steele may have worked for Oleg Deripaska. Number 4, salacious claims were based on second-hand information. Number 5, Steele briefed Jane Mayer during the campaign. And number 6, David Kramer wanted McCain to use the dossier to force Trump to resign. Now, I'll go through these individually very quickly because I spent more time on them before. I'll just go quickly. But before I do, I want to mention one thing about David Kramer that I forgot to mention in the video I did 2 days ago about David Kramer. I don't think I mentioned this, but after David Kramer gave his deposition to the attorneys in the BuzzFeed case down in Florida, his lawyers sought to seal his deposition so that it won't be public record. Because once this case is done, all the court filings and all the documents, including all the depositions, will become public property that you can read probably in a PDF file from the court records. He also has sought the same type of protection from his testimony to Congress. He also wanted that sealed. Now, obviously, because it's part of an investigation, it's automatically, I wouldn't say sealed, but it's not going to be released. But at some point, when this thing's all over, I imagine that all of this stuff will be released. I mean, they released the Nixon tapes. Why wouldn't they release all of this? And of course, at that point, I don't really think they'll care what David Kramer is wanting, and I don't think it will matter at that point, because John McCain will likely no longer be with us, and David Kramer may likely be too busy defending himself and other types of lawsuits as well, because I'm pretty sure he is going to be sued by Mr. Gubarev, because it's pretty apparent that he's very likely the person who gave the dossier to BuzzFeed, or he gave it to someone else who gave it to BuzzFeed. He certainly knows who did. So let's go back to these 6 items from Chuck Ross very quickly. That Steele, and the thing about this is, and the reason that this was a big deal to me, to Chuck Ross, to Sarah Carter, other people who are reporting on this New Yorker magazine story, is because a lot of the things that are stated in this story are either A, brand new facts, or B, things that we believed could be true, but no one had ever given any evidence or proven them or stated them as fact. In her article, these are things that she states as fact. Some new, some old. So when she states that Steele likely knew who funded the dossier, well, I think we all assumed he did. I mean, Glenn Simpson picks up the phone and calls his old buddy Christopher Steele and says, yeah, I'm working on some opposition research. I'd like your help. I'd like you to dig up everything you can on Trump and Russia. Okay, well, you're this super master spy, Christopher Steele. You're God's gift to the world of spies. You got all this credibility. You're really super smart. And your buddy Glenn Simpson calls you and asks you to dig up dirt on Trump and Russia as part of opposition research. Let's see. I wonder who's paying for that. I can't think who. I mean, we are in the middle of a presidential campaign between the Rotten Reverend, Crooked Hillary, and Donald Trump. Simpson is doing opposition research. He wants me to dig up dirt on Trump and Russia. I wonder who might be paying for this. I wonder who this opposition research is for. So, I don't think it was any question in anyone's mind that Steele likely figured out who was footing the bill for all of this. But she states in this particular piece that Steele likely knew who funded the dossier. Duh. And I believe that in the article it says that several months later he learned of it, which means he was probably told of it. Yeah, he's meeting with State Department official Weiner, who he knows, who tells him, yeah, oh, I got this from Blumenthal, who got it from Shearer, who's all inside Clinton people. He's dealing with all inside Clinton people. He's working on opposition research for Glenn Simpson on Trump Russia. Yeah, it took him 2.5 months to figure out who was actually funding the dossier and the opposition research. Come on. Come on now. Let's not all pretend we're all stupid. We're told that Christopher Steele's pretty smart. He would have had this thing figured out in 15 minutes. Next, Steele used dozens of paid confidential collectors. Now, there's a difference between the collectors and the sources, which we learn here. As we know from the documents and the court filings in the case and the deposition and the London case of Mr. Gubarev versus Christopher Steele, he states that he never, ever met with any of the Russian sources, that he used intermediaries. But we learn a little more in this story from his partner at Orbis Intelligence, that Christopher Steele has built up over the years, along with his partner, these collectors. And these collectors, they are paid to go out and dig up from the sources. So it wasn't like Steele was even getting this stuff from just one middleman. There's actually the collectors going to the sources, and they were probably getting it from someone else. We have no idea how many second-hand individuals were involved in this chain of information from the time it was at the root source to the time it made it back to Steele. We don't really know that. But we now learn from this story in the New Yorker by Jane Mayer that she says, she doesn't suspect, say it's suspected, she says it as matter of fact that the collectors are paid. Next, Steele may have worked for Oleg Deripaska. Well, I can't remember exactly how she words that, but that's her assertion in the article, and you can read it, is that this is toward the end of the piece when she's talking about what's happening now. And she's saying, yeah, well, they want to talk to Oleg Deripaska because they think he may have some connection with Steele. Well, obviously, if you look at all the people who are involved in this particular part of the process, Yeah, Steele is calling, he's calling a middleman who is the attorney for Mr. Deripaska. And if you look at a sort of a past history of these individuals, it's not hard to believe that Steele and Deripaska have had some contact before, or this intermediary has had some contact before. So it's not a big stretch. Then you have these salacious claims were based on secondhand information. Yeah, Christopher Steele even said in his deposition that he could not verify that. He didn't even try to verify that, and that it could be true or it could be untrue. He doesn't know. But that's something we already pretty much knew. And that Steele briefed Jane Meyer during the campaign. Well, she's writing this article, and she says in the article, as she's writing it, oh, well, I must admit that I was one of the journalists that met with Christopher Steele. Okay. That's okay. Doesn't really matter to me. And next we learned, according to Chuck Ross, something David Kramer wanted John McCain to use the dossier to force Trump to resign. Again, not really sure how she would know to prove that, whether she spoke with Kramer or someone else. But Kramer's attorney has denied this, but she prints it in the story anyway and puts it in there. Very interesting. So these are the things that caught the ear of Chuck Ross. Fine and dandy. They were no big surprises to me. Then we get Sarah Carter, who looks at this New Yorker piece, just like me and many other people, and she finds something else that she finds very interesting, which is that, and her article was about the fact that Steele was informed that the Rotten Reverend Clinton campaign was paying for the dossier months after being hired by Fusion GPS, and that the FBI did not tell the FISA court that Christopher Steele knew who was paying him, but they go one step farther, as Sarah Carter points out, and says the FBI actually told the FISA court that Steele did not know Hillary was paying for the dossier. Again, back to my original point. I find it very difficult to believe that Christopher Steele gets a phone call from Glenn Simpson at Fusion GPS, which is exactly what she describes in her article. Simpson calls and says, I'm working on some opposition research. I'd like your help. I want you to get everything you can on Trump and his connections to Russia. Now, how long would it take Christopher Steele or you or me or anyone else with a reasonable degree of common sense, especially a super spy, right? How long would it take you to figure out that the person obviously paying for the opposition research would be Hillary Clinton or someone representing her campaign? I mean, you do not have to be a genius to figure this out. The point of Sarah Carter's story was the fact that they lied to the FISA court. They specifically said that Steele did not know who was paying for the opposition research. When it appears at this point, according to Sarah Carter and what's in the article, he did know. The only question is, when did he know? And did the FBI know? But again, the FBI would have to be complete numbnuts to think that Christopher Steele wouldn't have figured that out on his own. You didn't have to tell him. I mean, you know, you don't have to be a weatherman to know when it's raining, when you walk outside and you end up like a soaking wet rat, you can assume that it's raining. So, let's move on. As you know, when I did my video, the thing that stuck out to me, all these other things, yeah, I mean, I gathered those in, and I'm like, yep, that's all good. But what caught my eye, and I'm surprised Chuck Ross and Sarah Carter haven't reported on this, and I'm not going to even speculate on why, but the most important thing in this New Yorker story was the fact that she stated that, and let me find it, I can actually probably quote it, I've read it so many times, that, let's see. Yes, that Christopher Steele filed a report with Fusion GPS just days after the July 22nd or July 26th, 2016 release of the DNC emails, where he said that the hack involved Russian agents working within the Democratic Party itself. That was July 26th, 2016, when WikiLeaks released the emails, July 26th. What happened 2 weeks before that? On July the 10th, Seth Rich was murdered. Seth Rich is murdered on July the 10th, and then on the 22nd, 12 days later, they release the DNC emails from WikiLeaks, and then just a few days later, Steele writes a memo which he sends to Fusion GPS, which states that there are Russian agents inside the Democratic National Committee. As I already speculated, I'm not going to go through it all again, but to say that there were Russian agents inside the DNC is ludicrous. I mean, there's only two ways to look at this. Is he saying that there were like Russians who somehow got jobs at the DNC? I've already pointed out that that is monumentally ridiculous. You do not get a job working at DNC headquarters in the height of a presidential campaign unless you're personally approved by someone very high up in the campaign. You have to know people to get into that headquarters of the DNC. You have to have been a donor or an activist or a worker of some sort on Democratic Party politics. You have to be connected to people. I went through how Seth Rich got his job there. You've got to be connected. You've got to be part of the Democratic machine. You have to be an insider. You have to know people. There's no way that some Russian just strolled in off the street a few months before the campaign and got a job at the DNC. This is nonsense. So we can rule out that it was some sort of a, Boris and Natasha got a job at the DNC so they could do some dirty underworld work. No, this is insanity. Don't believe it. I don't. You shouldn't. It's stupid. Let's go ahead and think about what's actually he could be saying. The only thing he could be saying is that it was someone who was in the DNC, who was a Democratic Party operative, an employee at the DNC, who was turned by the Russians, or who was working for the Russians. And who would that be, do you think? Who do you think he would be talking about? It could only be Seth Rich. Which leads me to where I want to go with the story today, which is that I don't believe that Jane Mayer was the author of this story. I believe she was simply the stenographer, and that the story could have easily been written, and you should read it, the story could have easily been written by Adam Schiff. Literally, read it. So the question remains, who planted this story? Who gave this story to Mayer to publish in the New Yorker magazine? And why the New Yorker? Why not the New York Times, the Washington Post, one of these other papers where you know it's going to get a lot more circulation, a lot more people biting on it, a lot more excerpts of it coming out, a lot more play, a lot more credibility on the political side, because the New Yorker is kind of a pop culture magazine. They report on a whole bunch of things, the entertainment and sports and all these local things, and then they have a political section. It's not quite like putting it into the New York Times or Washington Post or something like that, or giving it to CNN or something like that. No. They put it into a place where it's out there, but it's kind of below the radar in a way. And that only people who dig for this kind of stuff, who do searches on specific things, like me, Sarah Carter, Chuck Ross, other people who do this type of investigative work, would dig this stuff out. So they wanted it out there, but they didn't really want it out there. They want it out there so they can someday come back and say, oh, well, that's public information. It's already out there. It was in this. It was reported here. So that's a reason why that's done. It's very, very shady. It's very, very much like the type of thing that intelligence agencies do. This is the kind of thing that they do. So who planted the story? And why? And why did they plant it in the New Yorker? Could it have been John Brennan? Well, we've already explained that John Brennan is no longer at the CIA, but when he left the CIA, they didn't empty out his brain. They didn't hook up a hose to his ear and suck the information out of his head. No. When he walked out the door of the CIA, everything that Brennan knows about everything is right here. Also, the people who worked for Brennan, his team, his people at the CIA, probably a small compartmentalized group of individuals, probably loyal to Brennan and the rotten Reverend Clinton, and Obama, are probably still active and still working, and probably the ones who are doing a lot of these leaks on Brennan's advice. Brennan could be sitting back. No, he's no longer in the CIA, but he could still be sitting back communicating and directing activities within the agency, outside the agency. This is what I'm saying. How about this? Whose reputation in this story is it 90% of the story is trying to resell Christopher Steele to us, trying to bring back him as this very credible person to rebuild his reputation, to save his credibility and his reputation, in fact. So, and we know that Christopher Steele met personally with Miss Mayer when he briefed her. Is it possible that they exchanged some information, some contact information? Is it possible that Christopher Steele sent an email over to Jane Mayer and said, hey man, I'm getting beat up over here. Now they want to investigate me. I'm taking a lot of heat. You know, I came out there, I briefed you. You know, I've done everything I could. I could really use you to throw me a lifeline, man. Just anything you can do to help. Just write a story and just, you know, try to tell people that I'm a straight up guy. I'm a good spy. You know, I have no intentions. I didn't mean to get all this stuff out in the press. I didn't mean for all this to happen. I was just doing some opposition research. I didn't mean for it to go public. You know, I was, you know, trying to give it to the FBI. I was just concerned about the country and the world, Trump and Russia, collusion, blah, blah, blah. You know, so it could be that Christopher Steele himself reached out to Jay Mayer and said, hey, can you help me out? My reputation's getting soiled and damaged, and I'm facing a lot of problems. I could be bankrupted in lawsuits. So anything that you could do to help me out, friend. And maybe this is what this is all about. Maybe it could have been Confusion GPS and Glenn Simpson. His chestnuts are also roasting over an open fire, right along with Christopher Steele and BuzzFeed and a lot of other people. And he could have called and said, hey, you know, I've done you a lot of favors over the years. You know, I've given you, you know, some tips. I've done things for you. And man, we're really taking a beating right now. BuzzFeed's probably going to lose that lawsuit down in Florida. Christopher Steele is, you know, he's probably going to go down in that lawsuit in England. You know, I'm next on the chopping block. I got 3 different people suing me. We're just getting hammered. I'm doing everything I can. I got people out there working night and day. We're trying to salvage this thing. We're trying to, you know, prove this story. We're working on some other things, Trump business dealings with Russia. We're doing everything we can, but we're just really getting hit right now, man. Could you do us a favor, Jane? Could you write us a piece? Could you write a piece and try to help us with our credibility, which is right now being questioned in a big way, and it could cost us a lot of money. And by the way, you were involved in this, Jane. Oh yeah, Jane. And maybe did I pay you, Jane? Did I pay you some money to write that story, Jane? I'm trying to remember. Did I cut you a check? I wonder if I did, because if I did, and I can remember that, that could be a problem, Jane. We could sure use your help. So, I don't know, but I know that Jane Mayer just didn't sit down and write this damn story because it popped into her head and she suddenly felt the need to resuscitate the reputation of Steele, Fusion GPS, the Democratic Party, the dossier, the Obama administration, and the whole damn thing. No. That did not happen. Someone contacted her. I don't know if she even wrote the story. It could have been written by Simpson. It could have been written by Steele. It could have been written by his partner at Orbis. It could have been written by anybody, maybe CIA operative. Could have been Peter's been stroking us and lose Lisa Page. They obviously have a lot of time on their hands right now. Maybe they need some help as well because they're also their reputations also are trying to be saved in this piece as well. So. Yeah, she actually tries to make an excuse for the insurance policy. Oh, they didn't actually mean an insurance policy, like to go after Trump in case he might win. Oh, no. They were talking about something else. They were talking about the Russia investigation. Yeah, that's what it was. The Russia investigation. It's crazy. You got to read the story. It just doesn't fly. But it's an attempt, and I really am suspicious of it. And I'm telling you, it wasn't just Jane Mayer who just popped in her head to sit down one day and write this story this far down the road. She leaves out tons and tons and tons of details. It's clearly a piece designed to rescue the reputation and make Christopher Steele out to be this great guy, this super spy who had nothing but good intentions throughout. He never wanted to cause any problems. None of this. No. This is just not going to fly. I think if you read the story, you'll see what I'm talking about. Now let's go a little deeper into this. So, as I said, It is possible, I think, that this entire story, if it came from the CIA, was an effort to create this story, which is a fluff piece, which is all just fluff. It really doesn't amount to anything, really. The only sentence, the only really two sentences in the entire story that have real consequence is the two sentences where she says that after the WikiLeaks came out, several days later, Christopher Steele wrote a memo to Fusion GPS and told him that his sources told him there were Russian agents inside the DNC. That, to me, if this was not Steele, or if it's someone like that, if this was the CIA, then this is the only two sentences in the entire article that were meant to mean anything, and everything around it was just a smokescreen, just a reason to put those two sentences into a story. That's all that story existed for, was to put those two sentences in the story. And why would those two sentences need to be in the story? To tell us that this brand new information, not sure where she got it, but Christopher Steele saying his sources told him that there were Russian insiders, people working within Russia, Russian agents working inside the DNC, which is asserting that they were the ones who had something to do with the hack of the DNC, which we know wasn't a hack. It was a leak. And so I asked myself, why? What is going on with that? Why would they say that? They didn't need to say that. It's not something you put in an article unless there's a real reason to do it. I mean, that's not something you put in there, and it's brand new information. So what would cause someone to want that to be in there? So I thought about it for about an hour, and then I came to the conclusion. I thought, you know what? About 2 weeks ago, we covered a story here that was written by this Admiral Lyons, the former head of the 7th Fleet, who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Times, which got a lot of people talking in the alternative media, the regular media, mass media, corporate media, stayed totally away from it. They did not touch it with a 1,000-foot pole, because the story dealt with two things: the issues regarding Seth Rich and his murder around everything that was going on, and the questions that remain about that, and also the DNC hacks, and the fact that there's never been any hard evidence that the DNC was hacked by Russians or anyone else. And he asserts in this article that Seth Rich was most certainly the person who leaked that information and downloaded it from the DNC. It was not a hack. He took it from the DNC and gave it to WikiLeaks one way or another, through an intermediary or himself personally, one way or another, that he gave it to WikiLeaks and they published it. So this article comes out by Admiral Lyons. And so the alternative media kind of really bites on this. I know I did, a lot of other people did, and we start talking about this story by Admiral Lyons. I mean, he's a fairly credible individual. He was a former commander of the 7th Fleet, a recently retired Navy admiral. He's not a crazy person, okay? So he writes this story. And then, less than 2 weeks later, we get this story in the New Yorker, which wants to drop this line in here about the fact that Steele's sources are saying that there were Russian agents within the DNC. What this tells you tells me, and as I said in the previous video, is that it is possible that there are people within the CIA, maybe Brennan, maybe someone else, that know that as this investigation moves forward, that there may be something there in this investigation that possibly is even known by a special prosecutor who may be involved, maybe Sessions people involved, maybe the IG, maybe Nunes's committee, Kublat's committee. Someone may have something that has a tie or a link to Seth Rich and the DNC hack, or whatever you want to call it, the leak. And that maybe they have this information. And that maybe what they're doing is setting the stage to fight this allegation. And that if it does turn out that we learn that they have to come out and admit, yeah, we have determined that probably it wasn't the Russians that actually hacked into the DNC, but it appears now that it very likely could have been that staffer, Seth Rich. He probably, he may have been the one who actually did download those files and give them to WikiLeaks. And if that comes out, that is horribly damaging, and it leads everywhere. It leads everywhere. So in order to try to cut it off at the pass, you come out and write this story and you say, oh, the Russian agents inside the DNC. And who would that have been? It could only have been Seth Rich. So that when this truth comes out, whether it be a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, when the truth comes out that Seth Rich was the guy who leaked that and gave it to WikiLeaks, they can then say, oh yeah, and about a year ago we were onto that, because we learned from this New Yorker magazine piece that Christopher Steele, after the WikiLeaks releases, told Fusion GPS in a memo that his sources said that there was a Russian agent working within the DNC, and they're going to try to make Seth Rich a Russian agent. That's how they're going to cover it. They're going to say, oh yeah, Seth Rich, he's the key. He's the guy. The Russians co-opted him. He was working. And that is probably how they keep Seth Rich's parents and his brother quiet. Zip. They have nothing to say. They seem terrified. When you see them, rarely do you see them anymore, but right after he was murdered, they were out there talking to the public, raising money, trying to raise awareness, trying to get all this attention. But once they sent in Mark Baumann from the DNC to get them to clam up, and we don't know if they've been paid or just threatened, but for some reason, you just don't hear much from Seth Rich's parents anymore. Maybe it's because they've been told this. Maybe someone said to them, Mr. and Mrs. Rich, it's a shame what happened to Seth, but, there's some information that we've gotten from sources that, he may have been compromised, by the Russians. And that wouldn't look good if that came out, really, Wouldn't look good, really. And we just don't want that to get out, So it'd be best just to let this thing, lie. And let it go away. So we can see that there's, when we're talking about the deep state, and I've been dealing with this stuff, I've been researching this type of stuff for 30 years. This is classic CIA, Black Ops type stuff that we're dealing with right here. This is exactly, it's hard to believe when you're an average person just sitting back and someone like myself tells you this, but if you've researched and read enough about enough CIA operations, and I spent about 2 years one time just doing nothing but researching CIA operations. I researched about 50 or 60 of them. And I actually have got the files, probably even got the printed paper. I can go back and read them all for you on TowerGate. Crazy things. And so I know about the how deep and how elaborate their schemes are that they do to set people up and to fabricate things and to create things. The amount of effort to do these type of things is absolutely amazing. And you actually have to actually read it. And really read a lot of it to where you really start to grasp it. Because right now it just sounds crazy. But believe me, they set these things up, and where they stand right now, it sounds kind of crazy. But a year from now, just like a year ago when Trump came out and said, yeah, I just found out they tapped my wires at Trump Tower. Oh, he was crazy. He was nuts. None of us could ever believe that. None of us would think that the Obama administration would do that or what have you. Some people may have speculated. Boy, it's awfully risky. That type of thing. All crazy. Couldn't imagine. But look what we know now, a year later. And now it all makes sense. The same is true with this. So that a year from now, if it comes out that Seth Rich, and they have to prove or have to admit that Rich was the leaker, because if you keep going down this road in this investigation, at some point you are going to have to deal with the Seth Rich issue. And when you do, boy oh boy. So this is something that has crossed my mind, and I think it may have been a response, this article may have been a response to the article by Admiral Lyons less than 2 weeks ago, and they needed to do something to try to save the narrative. And this story on the New Yorker might have been what they had to do to save the narrative. So there we go. That is TowerGate for this Sunday. We have a little bit more on this on Monday, and then we'll move on to other things. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys have a good Sunday evening. See you on Monday. Bye.